Hey everyone, welcome back to That's Not Bad. I'm Phil, great to have you here. Today we've got a recommendation from Cliff, and Cliff lives in Alpine, Utah, over in the US. Cliff, I had to look that up, never heard of it, but looks like a lovely, well, I don't know if I call it, it's probably not a town, is it? Very, very small city, to be fair, but gee, pretty picturesque where you are, my friend, so thank you for reaching out. Cliff sent through a suggestion and a bit of an email around this one. So it's a 60 Minutes article, and it's relating, and it's 60 Minutes Australia, to clarify, relating to AUKUS, so the nuclear submarine deal between the United States, United Kingdom and Australia. And I guess there's some geopolitical stuff there. And I guess I've had some visibility as a Kiwi, because there's now, well, obviously Australia's right next door. We've got the whole Asian sphere of influence, geopolitical stuff going on, the US, China, all the smaller countries, a whole raft of different stuff. But New Zealand in discussions to become a tier 2 partner for AUKUS, which I think is more lower level technology transfer, certainly not the nuclear side, not the submarine side, but some stuff on the edges. And I guess maybe that's a reflection of the fact that we're in the Five Eyes Agreement, along with Canada, who are also excluded from this. But obviously some pretty significant geopolitical stuff, but it looks like we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of the sub and maybe capabilities and costs and political considerations. But this should be quite an interesting view, especially where I am in the world as well. So Cliff, my man, thank you. We'll get into it. Boom.
At more than $300 billion, the cost for Australia to acquire a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines is beyond substantial. For the money, though, the country will get enormous firepower, the most advanced and lethal fighting machine humans can build. The submarine spruikers say we'll also obtain something you can't put a price on: stability in our region. China might not agree, but the theory is, by showing our fighting capability, Australia is really proving how much we want peace. Tonight, the United States Navy has given us very rare permission to come on board and test drive one of its incredible attack subs, the Virginia-class USS North Carolina.
Wow.
It's as mesmerising as it is menacing. To feel the force of a nuclear-powered submarine churning through the ocean is so exhilarating, you almost have to remind yourself this is a deadly predator, ready for war. A sinister beast that somehow seems more overwhelming the closer you get.
It's a great shot. Deterrence.
We can't tell you exactly where we are, but somewhere off the coast of Australia, we're about to board one of the best attack boats in existence, the USS North Carolina. And she's a sight to behold, one of 22 Virginia-class submarines in the world.
It's got a submersible attached to it.
The location of the subs at sea is top secret. And this is the first time the crew has boarded civilians in the middle of the ocean.
Or maybe it is. Is that a... I'll come back to that.
Whoever wants to come through first, you gotta step right here.
Thank you. To the untrained eye, the body of the beast is a maze of ladders, pipes, cables, and cramped corridors, where up to 130 crew members live and work underwater for months on end.
Every day is like one of those movies, you know, where the good guys are opposed with all this stuff, and you're like, how are they going to do it? And they come through it.
Making sure this boat is ready for war, anytime, anywhere, is ultimately up to the captain, Tad Robbins.
Submariners, man, I guess from a Navy perspective, they are, well, they have to be the best of the best. I mean, the fact that there must be a huge psychological screening process to get on board a submarine like that, especially when, for the nuclear-powered ones, if you're literally underwater away from port for weeks, if not months at a time, especially if they're the nuclear deterrent ones with the nuclear missiles on them, you've got to do some pretty serious screening. You don't want a guy going on, or a woman going on the boat in 2 weeks and going, hey, it's not for me, They must be, definitely a cut above the rest to be a submariner like that.
Captain, this is just incredible. Is this the best view in the world or what?
It is. It is the most amazing view in the world, best job in the world.
I know you've been in command here for over a year, but does it still take your breath away?
Every day. So every day I walk on the ship, it's a humbling experience, and I don't take a single day for granted.
Is he young to be a
Peace and
sub-commander?
stability here in the Pacific isn't taken for granted either.
Looks it.
China is growing more aggressive, using economic coercion and military expansion to bully its neighbours, with its sights set firmly on Taiwan. It's a great power competition the US and its allies can't afford to lose. You're obviously very across various geopolitical threats and tensions. How much does that weigh on your mind, play into your everyday decision making?
Certainly it's an ever-changing world right now, but our job is to keep the ocean free and open for everyone who wishes to sail in accordance with international law. So we don't sail at sea without being ready to take this ship into harm's way and to be ready for anything that might come our way.
Can things change here on board at any minute?
That is why we stay ready every day. Every day is a different day, and so things could change at any minute, any time. So we're ready at all times.
So is this onboard communication to the crew?
It is.
What are we hearing there?
So we're driving the ship from on top of the submarine right now. So he's talking to the crew below to operate the ship below, since he's at a distance from them.
From 2033, Virginia-class submarines like this one will be flying the Australian flag as they patrol the hotly contested Indo-Pacific and beyond, if all goes to plan, under the historic AUKUS deal with the US and UK. It's a huge pivot in Australia's defence policy and will cost taxpayers $368 billion over 30 years. Australia's about to spend a lot of money buying a few of these.
It's a good investment.
It is?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Why?
This is the most capable submarine in the world, and so the fact that Australia is getting in with nuclear power, certainly that extends the distance at which Australia can sail, and I think the whole country should be excited. I know the United States is excited.
Because, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I know the Collins-class submarines that Australia currently has, they've had some development issues over the years, but at the moment, a very capable submarine. But of course, because they're not nuclear powered, they're limited by time on station, especially if you are looking at going from the Australian continent up to China or that area. They're just literally limited on their endurance. And I guess every sub is also limited on internal supplies, food, water. But I guess if you have a bigger nuclear sub, you can put more stuff on there. So the endurance is really only limited by how much food and water provisions you can carry, right? So not just for the whole China consideration, but for the Aussies, from a capability jump, just that time on station, as much as anything else, would be significantly improved. So it's interesting stuff.
From up here, you really get a sense of the enormity of this boat. She is a monster, nearly 8 million kilograms of steel, 115 metres long, capable of carrying a dozen missiles and close to 30 torpedoes. But incredibly, in just a few moments' time, when we dive underwater, this submarine will become essentially invisible, undetectable to anyone.
Pilot, prepare to dive.
Wonder when that's going to change.
Prepare to dive. Prepare to dive.
In a matter of minutes, the mighty USS North Carolina is swallowed by the sea. Like a whale diving, there's a peaceful elegance about it. Taking on water until only the periscope remains. A final sign of life before the boat vanishes from the horizon into the depths of the ocean.
So much like an aircraft going into a dive.
Now I really feel like I'm underwater.
It's a privileged spot she's got there as a
now,
reporter.
Captain?
So we're now at submergence depth. So we are under the water, and right now we're just looking to get our buoyancy set correctly so that we can continue to operate submerged for as long as we have our operations down here deep.
And technically, how long could that be? How long could we stay underwater?
So you're on a nuclear-powered warship. So we make our own power, make our own water, make our own air. So we're really limited by our food supply. So we could stay down here for months if we needed to. I'll stay. Man battle station torpedo.
Aye, sir. Pilot, man battle station's torpedo.
As enthusiastic as the captain is to show off his incredible machine, he's careful not to say too much and give away the secrets that make this the most feared submarine in the world.
Our job is to be undetectable. We like to call ourselves the silent service.
You don't show up on radars or sonars.
That's the idea.
So we could approach any other warship or landmass and they wouldn't know.
It's very, very possible.
So if there was an enemy submarine a
Very
kilometre
possible.
away, would you know?
Our job, and the men you see behind you, their job is to detect the energy that's in the ocean, whether that be marine life or other ships in the ocean.
So you're telling me the crew is superior and the boat is superior?
Absolutely.
Basically.
Absolutely.
And make no mistake, they're armed to the hilt.
For our torpedo battery, we can carry up to about 30 torpedoes if we had full loadout.
30.
For our missile battery, we could load up to 12 missiles.
Weapons Officer Lieutenant James Hunter has a responsibility few of us can imagine.
I know this is your job and you're training for this all the time, but does it enter your mind the thought that you could be using these skills in a real conflict?
It does enter my mind. It's something I carry with me daily, and I actually carry with me on my hip, and I mean that physically. I have the keys for the tubes, and I carry them around with me at all times. Yeah, it's one of the very final steps. If we're going to go into engagement, I'll get permission for the captain, and I'll hand down the keys so we can make the tubes ready.
Wow.
He says the exact range of the weapons on board right now is classified.
Tomahawk, I'm
But
guessing.
Tomahawk cruise missiles can strike more than 1,600 kilometres away, almost the distance from Australia to New Zealand.
What is it about your weapons setup here that sets the Virginia class apart?
Well, for us in particular, really our reload capabilities. I have my torpedo men, and they can spin up and get a weapon ready in less than about 20 minutes.
And in a conflict, that's critical.
Yes, that's the primary factor that means that we'll be able to win the war. We can respond faster.
Just how the crew survive in these conditions is nothing short of astonishing. The kitchen turns over 570 meals a day. With little space to freeze food, it's either made fresh or out of a can.
And I don't know anyone who's served in the Navy. I know a couple of people that have served in the Army, but not in the naval side. I'm guessing over the years, as technology has improved, little things like the quality of the crew quarters and the quality of the food, not just from a make sure it's nutritious, there's sustenance, it's going to give them what they need, but just the quality, like, it's appetizing. It's not just slop that you might have got in the 50s or 60s. I mean, just from a very quick look here, it looks as though the crew amenities on board these vessels is a hell of a lot better than it must have been, going back even to the 60s and 70s. So, and that must help morale as well. When you're at sea for such a long period, the last thing you want is crap food, right? Be interesting to see if we see the living quarters and the bunks and that sort of side, because that will be quite interesting for me to just see, what's it like when they're not on duty. They've got their 12-hour or 8-hour off time. What is it like when they're chilling on these vessels?
It's a grueling lifestyle that most of us simply wouldn't manage. Perhaps not surprising then that the average age on board is 24.
This is my home away from home for the next Long
Here we
time.
go.
Lieutenant Lauren O'Donnell is one of just 3 women on the sub. She's also my roommate and assures me it's not as bad as it looks.
Yep, so there's 3 of us all tucked away in this little closet, like we like to call it Harry Potter's closet, underneath the stairs. And our only storage is the space beneath our racks.
It's a pretty tight space.
And honestly, in here, all I do is sleep. So I don't really mind how tiny it is. I don't need a lot of stuff. I wear the same thing every day. I have different sets of these for washing.
Good to know.
While there's no doubt these boats are impressive, already AUKUS has hit rough seas.
The French.
In Washington, D.C., intense negotiations are underway to greenlight the deal with Australia. But, as you'll see, there are no guarantees America can fulfil its end of the bargain.
Is there a risk then that it doesn't happen?
Yeah, and of course the
From
French.
up above, you'd
The French are not happy about this because when Australia are going to buy a bunch of French boats, they weren't nuclear powered, but relatively high tech, sort of next generation, and they basically said au revoir to the French and pulled out of that deal. When I presume they paid Australia paid a penalty, it must have been quite substantial, I'm guessing, to jump into bed with the US and the UK on the nuclear sub deal. So I know President Macron was really pissed. This is going back, 12, 18 months, like he was just apoplectic about the whole situation. And I think there was a diplomatic incident. I think ambassadors might have been recalled potentially, I'm not sure.
never know that a couple of 100 metres below the surface, a nuclear-powered attack submarine is on the move.
Pilot, make your depth 250 feet. Use a 20-degree up angle.
Navigating the ocean at extreme angles.
Oh, wow. So we're diving?
We're going down.
Leaving the crew and their coffee struggling to stay upright.
It'll take about 3 minutes to change that 400 feet.
You can feel that pull. Is that about testing the
Jesus.
ship as well?
Testing the ship's capabilities and also testing our stowage on the ship is
Cruise readiness?
cruise readiness and the ship's readiness to take a large maneuver
Well, the
like
lean
this.
back.
It's such a weird feeling, isn't it? You're probably used to it.
It does take some getting used to.
The Americans have been operating nuclear-powered subs longer than any other country. The world's first, the USS Nautilus, was built in 1954 and now rests at its home port in Groton, Connecticut. Frozen in time, the technology has clearly dated. But 70 years on, the realities of life at sea remain the same.
That'd be great to visit.
As does the town's passion for manufacturing the most advanced boats in the world.
When people think of a submarine, you just see this big steel metal structure. When you really get to the nuts and bolts of what happens, it's incredible.
In this quiet corner of Connecticut, not far from the Nautilus, Joe De La Cruz and his small team make metal parts for the US Navy's growing fleet of submarines. He's incredibly proud, knowing the boats born here will end up providing a huge strategic advantage at sea.
We have these surface ships that are everywhere, but we know where all of China's surface ships are, and they know where ours are. What we don't know is where the submarines are. And that's why it's going to be very critical for not just the U.S., but for other countries to get involved in this technology, because I don't see a place in time where you can just find those things regularly. The ocean's very big.
Like all the manufacturers in Groton, Joe's factory is about to get a whole lot busier because he'll be making submarine parts not only for America, but for Australia too. Our government plans to buy between 3 and 5 Virginia-class boats.
Can someone with more knowledge here let me know, drop a comment. I'm presuming there's a submersible of some sort for special forces in that dome. Is that like a I'm presuming that's what it is. It looks too bulky to be anything else. Because I'm guessing special forces insertion would be a fairly key requirement for a vessel like that, so, or a boat like that. I'd be interested to know. Let me know.
With the first to come under Australian command in 10 years.
How did you feel when you heard about the deal involving Australia?
I could not have been happier. When you purchase one from us, it's gonna be done with the same care that we take when we make it for our sailors.
But for all the excitement, there are also significant concerns. American shipyards are already struggling to build 2 Virginia-class submarines a year for their own navy, let alone fulfil Australia's order. And US lawmakers can't agree on how to share nuclear technology with another country.
When you think about all the layers of complexity, it is, I would argue, as challenging as the space program in terms of what it requires of an industrial base.
In Washington, D.C., Congressman Joe Courtney goes by the nickname Submarine Joe. He spent his career fighting for shipbuilding in his home state of Connecticut. He's now chair of the AUKUS caucus here on Capitol Hill, a working group to help Congress understand the complex legislation ahead.
It's ambitious, but you're confident this deal will be a success?
I believe that there actually is some really strong bipartisan momentum to move AUKUS forward. So we've got work to do, and I'm optimistic we're actually going to get some results.
How much does the success of the deal rely on the support of Congress in the coming months?
A lot. I mean, we've got to deal with some structural issues in terms of how this technology is shared with a new sort of member of the club in Australia. This has only happened once before, back in the 1950s, when Winston Churchill and Harold Macmillan lobbied President Eisenhower and the Congress to include the UK in this technology. And since then, that's really been the only country that has been really brought into that sort of crown jewels of the US government.
Back home, there's plenty of healthy scepticism.
I mean, the United States shipbuilding industry isn't what it was during World War II or even during the Cold War. So they're pretty busy trying to address that at the moment.
Is there a risk then that it doesn't happen?
Well, there's always that risk. That's certainly in the spectrum of potential future outcomes. I think we should have a range of different capabilities in our strategic deterrent beyond submarines.
Military strategist Mick Ryan is a retired Army Major General and former commander of the Australian Defence College. His concerns go beyond the logistics of AUKUS to the extraordinary cost to taxpayers here, up to $368 billion.
I mean, a third of $1 trillion. When that rolls off your tongue, it actually doesn't roll off very easily.
The spending begins right away, but with no new money allocated to fund AUKUS in the short term, the government has to find $3 billion in cuts and savings in the next 4 years. And as Mick Ryan points out, something will have to give.
Is it possible to pay for this out of the existing defence budget?
I don't think that's possible at all. We're probably going to have to grow the percentage of GDP that's spent on defence beyond 3%. We may not be doubling it like the Japanese have, but it's going to have to grow if we want to have nuclear submarines and an Australian Defence Force at the same time.
So the numbers don't add up?
Well, they don't at the moment. The Defence Strategic Review and the last budget really didn't give us a lot of comfort that the government has a good handle on the future budget for these submarines, as well as having an Australian Defence Force that's modernised and capable of operations on the land, in the air, on the sea, and in cyberspace and in space.
With all these moving parts, are we putting all our eggs in one basket?
Well, we're certainly putting a lot of eggs in one basket, and given other countries in our region are significantly enhancing their defence spending, we really need to look at, well, what's the balance of capabilities in our strategic deterrent over the coming decades?
It's interesting he talks about percentage of GDP. I know that was very topical a couple of years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine, and there was, and again, much wider conversation there, but talk about how some of the NATO partners were spending a very low percentage of their GDP on defence, and in some instances below the minimum for NATO members. I'm not sure if it's 2 or 2.5%, but there were some that were below that. And Trump, when he was president, sort of drilled on that, and that was one of his. We're getting way off track here, but that was one of his concerns. And when he threatened to pull out of NATO, he was sort of saying, "Well, look, we're bankrolling the majority of it." Blah 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 blah. But it's interesting, if you look at GDP, while there's always going to be a percentage on defence, you look at that baseline budget, right? So the bigger the country, the bigger the economy to support it. You look at Australia's economy, compare it to, say, New Zealand. I mean, I think we spend 2.5%, but our entire defence budget is a drop in the ocean compared to the likes of Australia. So it's all proportional, I suppose. And I guess they're going to ramp those costs up over the coming years, but it's a big commitment, a big spend, right?
There's no simple answer, and it's wise to be cautious when committing hundreds of billions of dollars to anything. But the government warns the threat Australia is facing is so great that only these submarines can deter or confront it.
We need to have this capability.
$368 billion, it is such a huge sum of money. How can you justify it to taxpayers?
Yeah.
Well, they've had an incredible life, the Collins class, haven't they?
They have had an incredible life and continue to have that life, and they do.
After more than 20 years, Australia's fleet of Collins-class submarines is now close to retirement. And Defence Minister Richard Marles couldn't be more thrilled about the first boats to replace them. Nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines purchased from the US.
We will become just the 7th country in the world to operate nuclear-powered submarines. I mean, Australia's never been in such elite company when it comes to military capabilities that we've operated.
Unlike the Collins, which has to surface every few days to recharge its electric batteries, the nuclear-powered Virginia can stay submerged for many months at a time. And as we saw on board the USS North Carolina, the boat is undetectable underwater, a huge advantage in deterring or fighting our enemies. Are you worried about China starting a war in our region?
China's military build-up forms part of the landscape that we live in. In the year 2000, China had 6 nuclear-powered submarines. By the end of this decade, they'll have 21. In the year 2000, they had 57 major warships. By the end of this decade, they'll have 200. Now, by contrast, what we're seeking to do is replace 6 diesel-electric submarines with 8 conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines over the next 30 years. It's actually a modest step, but it's critically important.
These submarines can't be much of a deterrent, though, until they're in the water, and that could be a decade away. Is that too long?
Well, it certainly is important that we have these submarines in the water in about a decade, and I think that will work.
But does that leave a gap where we don't have those deterrents for a decade?
No, but it's important that we are able to have this capability in place in the early 2030s.
And the price tag is eye-watering. Under the historic AUKUS Pact, Australia will pay up to $368 billion.
Code red, code red.
To inherit between 3 and 5 nuclear-powered boats from the US in the 2030s, and then build a new design here in the 2040s to complete the fleet.
That'll be here before we know it,
It's such a huge sum of money. How can you justify it to taxpayers?
Well, that number is an estimate over a very long period of time. It is about 7% of the defence budget. I mean, we are an island trading nation. We are dependent on open sea lines of communication. We need to have this capability.
There's so much that we can't project or predict when you're forecasting these figures decades ahead. I mean, look at inflation, the dollar. How can you be confident the numbers will add up?
I mean, you're right there. Who knows what the inflation rate will be in the mid-2040s, the early 2050s. But what we do have a sense of confidence about is the proportion of this spend relative to our economy. This is worth every cent.
A defence spend of this size and price is unprecedented in Australia. And the Minister concedes it will come at the cost of other military projects. What are some of the capabilities we won't be able to afford because we're putting so much into nuclear subs?
We were looking at infantry fighting vehicles, for example, around 450 is what we inherited. So we've scaled that right back to about 127. I
mean, something else must have to give. Are we talking about destroyers or soldiers or manpower or what else?
Well, we're not talking about any of those. We'll be conducting a thorough review of the defence estate, for example. We're one of the largest property owners in the nation, and right now we've got significant land holdings in the middle of our capitals, which perhaps is not where our focus needs to be, given the strategic landscape that we face.
And so have some of those decisions actually not yet been made? You don't know yet where those savings and cuts will come?
Oh, well, we've made a number of those decisions already, but you're right, this is going to be a process that will be ongoing over the years ahead.
The years ahead will also involve intense training for Australian submariners in how to operate and maintain Virginia-class vessels. Some have already graduated from the US Navy's Nuclear Power School, and many more will soon embed with American and British crews.
There's more equipment, technology, and components in this space probably than anywhere else in the world. I imagine even the space shuttle, when it was in use, wasn't quite this complicated. Never been on one, I'm guessing though.
Command Master Chief Alex Jones is Chief of Boat and the most experienced officer on the USS North Carolina. He's responsible for everyone's safety and performance, including our own, as we disembark.
Man, what a unique assignment that would have been to go on that boat, man.
Conditions are choppy.
That's fantastic.
And it's a delicate descent down a rope ladder into the waiting police boat.
Shit. That's awesome.
As our slightly unnerving but incredible assignment comes to an end, I'm struck by how overwhelming the task ahead is for our sailors, scientists, shipbuilders, and their families. It's an extraordinary commitment, and we're betting Australia's future on it. You are now at the coalface, really, of a new defence era for Australia. That must be exciting but also daunting. And how do you weigh all that up and sort of feel confident in your own decisions?
Well, it's in a sense all of what you've said. It is, we are confident, but it is also daunting. But getting these decisions right is going to be profoundly important for maintaining the way of life for our kids and our grandkids that we've been able to enjoy. And as an island trading nation, there is no platform which is more important to us than submarines.
Interesting. Makes sense, though. Wow.
Hello, I'm Amelia Adams. Thanks for watching 60
Thank you, Amelia.
Minutes Australia.
And thank you, Cliff. Mate, that was really interesting. I knew a little bit about the background to it, but to have some visibility on some of these other considerations, it's a significant investment in a direction for Australia to go on. You know, and I keep thinking about, you know, let's face it, right? We're in this part of the world, the West, you know, they're looking at the ambitions of China or otherwise. Let's not beat around the bush here. But I guess it's a case of, and this has been the case throughout the ages, right? You know, to keep the peace, you need to have a deterrent. And if your potential adversary has men or troops that want to inflict violence and harm upon you, then what do you need? You need men or women or people that will inflict just as great, if not more, violence back on them, right? So it's that deterrence. And most of the time deterrence works. Sometimes it doesn't, as history shows us. But I guess Australia's contribution to regional deterrence, they're not doing it on their own, but they're contributing to a perceived threat, and what the United States and Japan and South Korea and some of the other Southeast Asian countries are doing, they're playing their part. New Zealand political scene is quite different, and we're very much independent foreign policy, and so our perceived commitments are in different areas, shall we say, but I think it's important for us to be seen and heard, and to be counted, because you never know what the future might bring, right? The world is changing. So yeah, but Cliff, mate, that was really good. I really enjoyed watching that, so thank you, my friend. Any comments on that or any thoughts, always happy to see them, guys. So wherever you are in the world, stay safe, take care, cheers.